Hello and welcome to As It Comes, live from a musician's point of view. I'm Davina, I'm a freelance cellist based in London, and about a month ago I had my first orchestral rehearsal in 6 months. As performing gigs are so few and far between these days, I was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. I was so prepared, much more prepared for anything I used to do back in the day. It made me realise how much of my life I lived day to day. I used to be very busy and was earning decently, but the trade-off was that I felt inadequately prepared a lot of the time. Anyway, I wanted to make sure I was prepped, so I put the dates in my diary, haven't done that in a while, read the risk assessment document several times, practiced the rep. On the day, I prepped my masks I was going to wear, my clothes, packed a sandwich for the break. A textbook example of being prepared. Until I got on the wrong train. I hadn't had to catch a train in so long, plus I'd only caught trains a few times from where I live now, as we moved in shortly before the pandemic took off. For some reason, I got the train that left at the same time as the one I was meant to get on, and only realised when the next station was announced. I panicked, and decided that my best option was to get off the train and run to the connecting station. The next 12 minutes were of great discomfort. Running to stations was something I would take in my stride back pre-COVID. It's been a good while since I've had to do the last-minute dash for a train. Breathing was a struggle, as well as the fact that I don't enjoy running at the best of times, let alone with a cello on my back, wearing a mask, grasping my bag containing my carefully crafted sandwich. I made it to East Croydon Station with 2 minutes to spare. I'm surprised I didn't fall flat on my face running down that ramp at the station. If you know the one they tell you not to run down. I piled myself onto the train and sat down in a puddle of my own sweat, taking slight comfort in the fact that my appearance, at least, would repel others from getting close to me, thus enacting effective social distancing. How stupid is that? First rehearsal in 6 months, and I was almost late. I literally had 6 months to prepare for it. I laugh about it now, though. No matter how prepared you are, there's always something unexpected that life can throw at you. I mean, look at 2020. But I should probably get better at checking the trains from now on. My guest this episode is Daniel Rainey. Daniel trained as a violinist before becoming an artist manager for Keynote Artist Management. He lives up in Scotland, where he chatted to me on Zoom about his career journey, what an artist manager does, how his training as a violinist has informed his job, and what's been keeping him busy during the pandemic. Also turns out he's a bit of a fan of Shostakovich, which is always a good thing. Have a listen to my chat with Daniel. Daniel Rainey, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me remotely from Scotland.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So we're here to talk a bit about your job as an artist manager. But first of all, let me ask you, how's lockdown been for you? I feel a bit funny asking that question because it's almost like coming back from a summer break or something and asking people, how's your summer been? How's Christmas? How's your lockdown?
Well, Christmas is a long way away yet, or it feels like it anyway.
It's only half a lockdown away.
That's a good way of thinking. It's been fine. I lived in London for almost 7 years and then made the move back up to Scotland. Funnily enough, we were going to be working from home and I decided to come up to Scotland just for a couple of weeks rather than sort of be in London by myself, and then arrived in Scotland, and after about 2 days, then lockdown happened and was stuck here for 3 months, still with not a huge amount of stuff with me. Most of my stuff was back in London, so I had to live on very little items of clothing for that time, which was a little bit tricky. So towards the beginning of the summer, I went back to and moved back up to Scotland, working remotely, and our world is still moving slightly, but it's very different to how it would normally be. But I've just been trying to read plenty, listen plenty, and, lots of movie binges like most people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this has definitely been the year for the boom of Netflix, all the streaming services.
Oh, massively.
And Nintendo Switch, for sure. I mean, I think they all sold out at the beginning of lockdown.
Oh, I'm a bit of an old school. I've got a Nintendo 64, so I'm a little bit more old school.
Oh, wow. I'm so impressed you still have one of those. That's incredible. What games are you playing?
I'm playing, my favourite is probably Lilac Wars, and that's probably my favourite, and Mario 64. It was quite hard to track down though. I ordered it as a kind of treat to myself late last year and hunt on Amazon quite a bit to find it. But no, it was worth it.
Did you know they've remastered Mario 64 for the Nintendo Switch?
Have they?
It's coming out in like 2 weeks or next week or something. So Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, the one that was on the GameCube.
Oh, wow.
And Mario Galaxy, the one that was on the Wii.
Because I noticed some of the very old N64 games that you can still order, some of them are so expensive now because I guess, they're so rare and they're kind of collector's items, but I managed to get a good price. And another thing I've been doing a lot is, especially just, watching things on TV, but I've been revisiting shows that I used to watch when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
So things like all those like Nickelodeon shows that I used to watch when I was younger. I mean, I don't know if other kind of 90s kids might remember, but shows like Keenan and Kel and like Sister
yeah, and Nickelodeon
Sabrina and all those kind of things. Do you have that?
I didn't watch a lot of it. You know what? I used to always watch Nickelodeon when I was babysitting the kids next door, because I lived next door to this household where they had an 8-year-old, 3 6-year-olds, and a 5-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And that was my first sort of foray into babysitting. And I remember they were always watching it because they had the paid subscription, cable, whatever.
Maybe it's not fond memories for you then.
It was fine. I remember watching things like, was Hey Arnold a Nickelodeon?
Oh, yeah. I loved Hey Arnold.
The football
head, yeah. And yellow hair and everything. And...
Yeah, that's right. And Catdog.
Yes, where they were joined together. Yeah, that was a good as well. Of course, you do know you're Nickelodeon.
Well, that is such a bizarre concept, isn't it? Like, you don't forget that in a hurry.
But no, that was a good cartoon. I like that one.
Cool. So you've been revisiting Nickelodeon cartoons. That's great.
A lot of Nickelodeon, yeah. Especially, I don't know, I feel like at these sort of times you sort of start reflecting on your life a little bit and then you start reminiscing and then...
You need comfort, don't you? And I think those childhood shows bring us that.
For sure.
So it sounds like you've kept yourself busy during lockdown.
Yeah, I'm quite, dare I say, I'm quite good at kind of adapting when I need to and finding ways to sort of stay positive and finding little nuggets of joy in little things.
And I think that's so necessary as a musician, isn't it? You need to be adaptable and you need to stay positive, especially now. A lot of things where it's easy to see the negative side of things.
Yes.
You need that positivity to get you through and get the people around you through as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So as I mentioned before, you're an artist manager and you work for Keynote Artist Management. So can you tell us a bit about what an artist manager actually does? Because I think many audience members might not know what goes on behind the scenes of getting an artist on stage. And likewise, many students coming out of college may be unaware that that's a viable career option or that it even exists. So tell us a little bit about how you got into artist management. I started my life I started the piano when I was 6, and I started violin sort of shortly after that. And I was pretty serious musician in my youth. Particularly, I mean, violin was the love of my life for very, very, I mean, it still is a little bit. But I was a very, very serious player and wanted nothing else other than to be a musician. I had the usual kind of trajectory of, young musicians. I went to junior conservatoire at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland for 4 years, and then I did my undergraduate there. And then I went to Royal Academy of Music and did my master's there for 2 years, and then kind of spent, as most musicians do, a couple of years, sort of freelancing and doing a bit of everything. I mean, I did pretty well as a student. I was very lucky. I got to do some great things, and I soloed with orchestra quite a lot. I led orchestras, I did lots of chamber music and won prizes and things. But I think increasingly as I got older, I found that my love for music itself was a little bit stronger than my love for actually physically playing it. I think is true for a lot of people. I would hope that most musicians prefer the music itself rather than the kind of physical act of making it. Yeah, like there is that joy in making it, but also like there's the joy of sitting back and just listening to it,
and I think
or
if you're
absorbing
going
it.
to be a professional musician, you do have to love that side of it, at least a little bit, the kind of physical aspect of it, because otherwise, you're putting yourself through an awful lot of very grueling, all of that practice and kind of physical work, which I think sometimes musicians underestimate. There's a great quote, I can't remember who said it, past musicians are the Olympians of the small muscles. And it's very true. And people do, I think, underestimate the kind of sort of physical side of it. So it was kind of an organic thing. I mean, I would be in concerts, but I would start to ask questions as to, well, how the soloist is playing here, and who decided that, and do they decide what they play, or does somebody else decide, and how many rehearsals did they need, and who decides that, and how do they get from where they need to go, and who decides this and the other, and you realize just all of the things that go on behind the scenes that make it possible. And so I started kind of researching a little bit more, and then decided to give it a go, really. And I started applying for lots of positions, as many people have to do when they, when you're starting out and you don't really have, experience. And then I was very lucky to get this job with Keynote in January of 2017, when I started as an assistant artist manager. And then within sort of 2 years, I graduated up to an artist manager, which is what I do now.
So what sort of skills would these companies be looking for from recent music graduates? If you've got a performance background, or say a composition background, or something that's not necessarily to do with arts admin, what are some transferable skills that can be carried over into that?
Right now, it's a very difficult time in the industry, and I do believe and hope that in maybe a year, 2 years, that it will come back again, because sadly quite a lot of people are being made redundant, and a lot of those people will be very young people who are just starting out in their careers. But nevertheless, I still think it's important to look forward, and that in time things will improve, and that those opportunities will be there again for young people. So in terms of skills, I mean, basically an artist manager, one normally starts as an assistant artist manager first. So an assistant artist manager, you're mainly dealing with the kind of day-to-day running of an artist's life. So all of the sort of logistics and lots of travel and their general kind of calendar, and making sure that when they get up in the morning that they know where they need to be and what.
So which building are you performing in today, and how are you going to get there? So lots of booking taxis, booking flights and things like that.
Oh yes, lots of that. Which is actually, I mean, it seems quite kind of simple and humdrum, but it's incredibly important, because when artists, I mean, obviously not right now, but when they are traveling, sometimes all over the world, and they have however many concertos or operas or symphonies or whatever they have to. It's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of work, and little things like a pickup or a taxi or a nice hotel or a flight being on time, all of these kind of things just can really help put their mind at rest.
I imagine if they've got to play Tchaikovsky violin concerto in 5 different cities in as many days, the last thing they want to think about is some things like, as you mentioned before, flights, taxis, hotels, but also quite important things that might hinder their performance, like
massive.
Having the right work visa or something.
Oh, yes, that's a whole other thing. Is
that must be a big thing.
Yeah, things like visas and also tax issues and just... There's so many kind of administrative sort of things that have to kind of be in place. And the job of we do, especially as assistants, is to kind of take that pressure off the artist so that they can concentrate on what matters most to them, which is, of course, performance and being the very best that they can be. So, and then artist managers, I guess, which is the next sort of level up, you're dealing with, I guess, slightly larger, broader artistic things, and helping to kind of shape the trajectory of an artist's career.
So, for example, would it be things like making contact with orchestras that soloists could work with, or the type of repertoire that they might pick?
Exactly. Every artist is different. And, when an artist joins a management, some of them are at different stages in their career. Some they're starting out and, are very young. There are some that are more established. And every artist needs a slightly kind of different approach depending on what their priorities are and just what kind of person they are. That role has more to do with, as you say, reaching out to promoters and presenters and sort of quote unquote selling an artist and obviously trying to build up their diary and trying to shape that in a way that fits in with what they want to achieve artistically. So if they want to focus on a particular kind of repertoire, or if there's a certain territory that they haven't played in so much and want to play in more, it's our job to kind of hopefully provide a career that is satisfying to what they are sort of aspiring to.
So I imagine you're kind of helping the orchestras or the promoters fill in those pieces of the puzzle with your artists so that they get to tour their repertoire, whatever they want to do. And then you also sort of have to work with them quite closely to ensure that, for example, you don't accidentally program 5 Sibelius concertos in a row or something.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I say, again, it varies from artist to artist. You know, if the artist is very established, then often many offers will come in from orchestras, because if they're very popular and they're very much in demand, then it's more about who you have to unfortunately say no to, because you know, an artist can't, you know, do absolutely everything that's asked of them. Whereas with a younger artist that's starting out, that isn't quite so well known, it can take a little bit more labour to introduce. I mean, usually most of the time they've already won a competition, or they have some, you know, note of recognition somewhere.
But I imagine if they're starting out, they have to be a little bit more flexible with the companies that they're working with.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, they're all different in terms of what they want to achieve and what their goals are. But yeah, they have to, sometimes it's tricky with younger artists, because, you know, when you're starting out and someone messages and asks you to play something, you're going to say yes.
Yeah, of course.
But you have to be very careful. And I think that applies to not just, you know, soloists, but to any musician, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're a chamber musician or orchestra, whatever. You know, you have to manage that very carefully, because of course you want to set engagements and you want to play and you want to, you know, obviously everyone has to make a living as well, but you have to be very careful that you don't compromise the quality of your work. And also, I think artistic goals, you have to make sure that those aren't compromised either.
Yeah, that you are agreeing to do work that you actually want to do. It's not just saying yes because it might lead on to something else, while that is important, as you say. But yeah, you've got to make sure that the quality is there, that yes, you've said yes to this new concerto that you don't know. Are you able to realistically learn it before the concert date?
Exactly. You know, and every date is different. And I sort of have with the artists that I work with certain criteria that has to be, at least one of them has to be met in order for it to be a worthwhile date to say yes to. But again, it's a very kind of individual basis. So you have to kind of slightly switch your way of thinking depending on which artist you're talking about at that time.
I imagine, though, as someone who has freelanced before, and, you know, having to manage a busy schedule for yourself, that's something that could be really, really useful for taking into this line of work. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realise is, as a musician, they don't realise how large a skill set they already have. Things like managing a diary, things like logistics, like how are you going to get from A to B, or from this venue to that venue? And in a way, it's like you're just managing all those logistics that you used to do for yourself, but for someone else and on a larger scale.
Yeah, and I think for sure, I mean, when I started, I mean, there were some things that I really didn't know about, but I definitely think that my musical background has helped, you know, immeasurably in what I do now. And it also, I think as a musician, you have an amazing amount of empathy, which you really need when you're working with musicians and when you're working with artists. Even, I guess I'm an administrator, I technically work in an office, but it's a very emotional job because we're all very passionate about the art form and we want all of our artists to succeed. And throughout, you know, even the time I've been working so far, I always find parallels between some of the things that I experienced growing up as a musician and some of the challenges that I face in an office environment and in a working environment. I always make in my head the comparison between, you know, sort of when you're learning a work for the first time, for example, whether you're preparing it for a lesson or a competition or an audition or a concert, whatever it might be. And I think anyone who's done that knows that that process is very rarely, if ever, a kind of step-by-step or sort of incremental improvement. You know, some days it's going really well and other days it's not. The improvement can be quite kind of hit or miss. And that can be really quite disheartening. You know, if you get to the end of the week and you say, you know, I've spent 5 hours a day practicing this piece for the past 2 weeks, you know, why isn't it just better? But sometimes when you just step away from that and maybe take a break and look at something else or just try and clear your mind a little bit and maybe come back to it in a week, and suddenly those issues and those problems, it kind of has molded together. Yeah. And I noticed that in a different context with what I do now, you know, whether it's, you know, trying to organize a very complicated travel itinerary where you're flying here, there and everywhere and there's lots of logistics, or whether you're looking at something much broader, you're trying to introduce a new artist to a place that they haven't been before, or trying to increase their profile in a certain place or whatever. It's the same kind of process. I have some days where I'm typing away and the emails are just flying in and out of it's great speed and everything sounds really good, very productive, and it all feels very positive, and it's you're making great progress. And then other days where you just I can't think what to write and I don't know what to say and no one's answering my calls, and that meeting that I had booked has now been cancelled, and it was all going so well, now it's all gone.
Yeah, exactly. It's never as smooth as you expect it would be, and you have to accept those things.
Yeah, massively. And in the same way that sometimes when you just try and clear your mind a little bit and maybe concentrate on something else and just give it a chance to breathe, suddenly answers and opportunities and things come to light.
In a way, I'd say this lockdown period has been quite a useful thing for a lot of musicians, for myself as well, and this goes back to what you mentioned before about really reassessing your love for music and stepping away. Because I do feel like for me, because I've not been performing so much anymore, no one's been performing so much anymore, and obviously doing other things like podcast or vegetable gardening, and then you kind of come back to music with fresh ears and new insights. And I think that's really important, isn't it? Because when we're doing music all the time, that's when you get into that mode, as you mentioned before, where you're just focusing on one thing and things might not work out. But sometimes you need that other perspective to let things breathe.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of the things that I still do often now is, like most agencies, we have a sort of software that we use that gives us access to a kind of database and a diary feature, which has all of our artists, what they're going and where they're playing and everything that's going on, which we use to keep up to date. Sometimes I like to look through that and often look at past engagements that have been, because so often in this kind of job, you're constantly on a bit of a treadmill, because you've got to get this project completed and you've got to make sure this date is signed and sealed, and you've got to negotiate this contract, and then next season and the next season, and it can be a bit of a treadmill. And I remember often quite near the start of my career with this, I like many jobs, used to have a chat and a kind of appraisal as to how you feel things are going. And I haven't really thought about how I feel about anything, because I've been too busy sort of thinking about you're too busy thinking about the artists and other people. So often I will sit and look through my artists' old engagements, and when I look at certain weeks that they've done, I'll say, oh gosh, I remember, I had to overcome a really difficult negotiation there that I managed to fix. And I'll remember that engagement where, somebody missed their flight and we had to rebook, and, or, and all those little things, you look back and you see all those little bumps in the road that are so important, because you look back on them and think, I was able to deal with that. Is very heartening. And I think that's something that I would hope that, I certainly used to do that as a musician. If you've had a very busy month or a very tricky period with lots of pieces and kind of stressful situations, you can look back at those and draw strength from those. It's very important, I think, to do that when you have the time.
Yeah, and tell yourself, look, I'm still standing. Remember that horrendous week this time last year? I'm not sure how relevant it is now, looking back at my diary and being like, oh, look how busy I was, because it's somewhat depressing. In previous times, I used to use that as a strategy, where sometimes I'd look in my diary and think, oh my goodness, like there's really nothing coming up. This February's looking really, really sparse. But then a really good thing to do is to look back on last year's diary, and you see that things do fill up, and it's having that hope and that faith in yourself that things will get better. And I think with that mindset and that attitude, you'll make things happen,
Exactly, yeah. Something I think I would say to students as well, any kind of music student, that whether they're at conservatoire and they're not sure which kind of direction they want to go in, or whether it's right for them, that, I think musicians, I think even more so now, especially moving out of the pandemic, will have to be more flexible than ever. And it's a mixed bag, I think, the journey of training to become a musician. I think sometimes painted as quite a kind of glamorous time, and anyone who's done it knows that it's not quite. It's emotionally and quite a turbulent time, and there are highs that are very high and lows that are very low, and it can be quite difficult to navigate through that. But one thing that I'm quite convinced about now is that the skills that you develop as a musician are some of the most important skills I think you'll probably ever have. And they will inform your life no matter what direction you take, whether you stay in music or you go to a different side of the profession like I've done, or whether you go to something, completely different. Because as I say, even, going back to what I was saying earlier about, the process of kind of learning a piece and all of that. Those skills are so transferable to kind of any situation in life. And when you're cultivating those skills, when you're 15 or younger, in your teens, and it's a real investment in yourself. So I always say to people that some people have this kind of, I think, slightly dangerous attitude of, well, if I don't make it as a star soloist, or if I'm not, a concertmaster, or if I'm not this world famous professor, or if I'm not making money solely from playing my instrument, then I've somehow failed. And that's not true at all.
It's making people aware that the definition of a musician isn't just one thing, because I think that's the danger that a lot of students fall into. As you mentioned, they think, I'm going to be a soloist, I'm going to be a leader, I'm going to just do this one avenue of music. But the definition of a musician is so broad these days, and I think especially during the lockdown, everyone's realizing how much they need to diversify their skills. We can't rely on one source anymore.
No, absolutely not. And you can see that, especially with some younger artists up and coming. The ones that I'm usually most attracted to are, of course, they play brilliantly and are very credible, but they're not interested in just doing what's always been done. And I think that's the key for any musician, is to never be too comfortable doing what you're doing, and always be open to other things and to new things. And I think those are the ones that have the longest careers and the most satisfying careers, because you're always willing to push yourself and to try new things and to learn.
Exactly, yeah. Because I think you've got to make sure that you've got a career in several years' time. What if you had a couple of seasons where you did all the main concertos and then you were sick of those? What do you do next? You have to be open-minded to keep going and explore new repertoire, new ways of making music. So thank you for that. I think it's really, really valuable that people hear about different avenues of being a musician. I was wondering if you have any funny or amusing anecdotes of experiences that you've encountered in your job as being an artist manager. Because as you mentioned before, there's that slight stereotype of the glamorous life and everything, but I'm sure that's not true.
We're just sitting, booking dates all day and the money just pours in. No. And I mean, there's always those kind of funny email kind of typos and things like that, because, you're dealing with just so much information. I mean, we're quite a small agency, but, you're dealing with a huge amount of information at any one time. And you often have to be very kind of diplomatic. You're kind of the middle person, because, of course, you want to keep the promoters and presenters, you want to keep them happy because you want them to book your artist. But equally, you have to make sure that the artist is protected and that the artist interests are looked after. And so you're dealing with huge amounts of information all the time. And, inevitably, there can be, you might send an email to the wrong Davina by mistake.
There's so many of us.
Things like, I've had a couple of occasions where, an artist there's been maybe a scheduling conflict, and maybe small thing that the artist didn't really want to do, and something's come in and they're not able to kind of get out of that interview or whatever it may be. And then you end up writing an email saying, oh, great, you can get out of this now. And you've actually sent it to that person.
Oh, the classic thing when you send the email to the person you're talking about.
Everyone does it. So, but things like that. And, there's always often kind of travel disasters. I had a real, you'll know, maybe you've experienced this as a cellist, but I had to book a series of flights for a cellist at one point. And, some airlines are you can Mr. Cello or Mrs. Cello or whatever, and as the extra seat, and it's fine. But other airlines, you actually have to call them up, and you have to, the whole thing. You've got to give their measurements and the height and all the specifications, and then, you have to do the booking twice on the phone, and it takes a really long time. And I just spent a whole bank holiday doing that because it just takes so long. And then, of course, they booked the wrong flight, and then it was very, very last minute, and I had to call back, and they wanted to put them on a different flight that would be too late, and they wouldn't get where they needed to go to in time. And, you can have all kinds of fights like that over travel issues.
Oh, that sounds super stressful.
I had one incident where another artist called. Unfortunately, they'd lost their phone, and they got stuck, and then I had to try and get someone to come and pick them up. We weren't quite sure where they were, and all these kind of things. I mean, it sounds funny now, but it can be quite stressful at the time when you're having to.
Yeah, totally. Because it's just like, as I mentioned before, like if you're working freelancing in any big city or whatever, and there are things that will just get thrown at you that you're just not prepared for. And you don't expect when you sign up for the job, I'm sure, that this artist is going to lose their phone. But then when they do, you've got to deal with it.
Exactly. And, I love all my artists, and I always have tremendous amount of respect for the work that they do. I mean, traveling often alone for huge parts of the year, and to stand on stage and perform these pieces to an international standard in front of thousands of people. It's a huge ask, and it's a tremendous amount of effort that's needed to do that. So being in a position where I can do whatever is needed to make them perform at their best, I think it's it's a really rewarding thing.
So are you booking ahead for 2021, or do you know what's happening in terms of that?
Most seasons are usually booked at least a year in advance. Sometimes it can be even 2, 3, or even longer than that. But right now, I mean, it's a very tough time because, of course, a lot of concerts are cancelled, and
international travel's not really a thing anymore.
Really not a thing. And people don't really have the headspace to book quite so far ahead, because people are concentrating on just trying to manage the situation that's here right now. But some artists are traveling, slowly but surely, and there are lots of amazing presenters and organizations out there that are doing a great job of still making music possible. I think it will change. Hopefully in time we'll slowly start to open up more, and concerts will resume. But I do think it will be a different world. Again, we're going back to what we were saying earlier about finding the positives, that it's very easy to get very negative and say that, oh well, it's all over, and that classical music is dying and all this kind of thing. But I mean, people have been saying that for 50 years, and it's
still not dead. We're still here.
Exactly. And I think that for me, I think it's a chance to try new things that people have always wanted to try, or try and get rid of some things that weren't so good, that were kind of annoying.
Yeah, try and make it a better future for our industry.
Exactly, and it's a chance to do that and to find new ways of bringing music to people. And I still believe that, we live in such a technologically kind of obsessed, driven world, and everything is a lot of obsessed with image and kind of superficiality. And I think we are sort of threatened by the lack of deep meaning and substance in life. Everything these days is so temporary and disposable and transient. And I think classical music provides real substance and deep meaning to life that is very much needed.
A sort of pared down, back to basics type
thing. A little bit.
A chance for people to, like, as you mentioned before, when you take a step back and then you come back to something, it's a little bit of that, the hitting the refresh.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I always believe that, the way we present it might be a little bit different, than the way we structured it might be a little bit different, but the result, I think, will always be the same, that it is, classical music is something that provides just such nourishment and fulfillment to people, and that's why it's such an important part of our world.
And that's why it's still here.
Exactly, that is why it
hasn't been killed yet. I'm looking forward to getting my temperature taken at every concert that I go to.
It'll be worth it. I'm convinced.
Yeah, I had to have my temperature taken when I went into a restaurant the other
day.
Oh,
really? I haven't had any temperatures taken yet.
Really? It's a good thing to do.
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to complain. I mean, it's the way things are. I mean, but, thinking about your temperature taking, and then people have got quite used to, I guess, watching things online and experiencing music that way. But I don't think that can ever replace the in-person experience of a concert and sharing music, because that kind of connection between the performer or performers on stage and the audience, that kind of spiritual communion, if you like, is a very special connection. And I think what it ultimately leaves us with is a very strong form of emotional connection that brings people together, irrespective of culture or country or language or anything. And that is something that I think is so valuable. It's great to be able to experience music in lots of different ways, but I don't think it can ever replace the in-person experience.
Exactly. I don't think people are going to think, oh, well, I might as well watch this at home, if they are presented with the opportunity to go to a live concert.
I hope so. I do hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. There's only so many, of those a cappella videos that you can watch.
Yes, exactly.
It's just not the same. As you may or may not be aware, in my podcast, I have a segment called the Wildcard Question Round, which is your opportunity to choose what I ask you next based on 3 choices that I present to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your 3 choices are unexpected talents, favourite concerts, and, because this is me, food and beverage.
Oh my goodness. I think I could do a whole podcast episode about all 3 of those topics. I think I'd probably, in terms of lockdown, I think I'd have to go for the concert one.
Great. Okay, so can you tell me what's your favourite concert that you played in, and also your favourite concert that you've watched?
One thing I do want to mention, actually, in terms of playing concerts, is I don't know what it's like in other countries, but the UK, I think, is so lucky to have a really thriving amateur music scene. And there are so many great amateur symphony orchestras and music centres around. Yeah. And I've been really lucky to play in one in London, the Academy of St Marylebone, based at St Marylebone Church, which is just down the road from St Paul's, run by a oboist named Alex Fryer. I mean, it is an amateur orchestra, but I mean, the standard is, anything but, incredibly high standard of music making and organization as well. It's an incredibly well-run group. And we've done some really, really great programs and always really enjoyed kind of working with them. And it's quite a different feeling. And like you say, coming back to music and playing just for pleasure and not playing kind of in a professional capacity. You're not earning money, you're just playing for sheer pleasure. So I've really enjoyed working with them over the years. Singular concert, okay, I've got two, I can narrow it down to two. Very lucky to play Shostakovich First Violin Concerto with orchestra when I was, maybe 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh, I thought you were going to say when I was 6 or 7.
Oh no, I wasn't one of those. Not at all. No. Gosh, no.
Would have been wow. That would have been impressive.
That would have been something. But no, not me. I played it with a student orchestra in Glasgow when I was still studying, and that piece is one of my very favourite violin concertos even to this day. And it's an incredible experience to play a concerto like that because the orchestra is just so huge. It's just such a muscular piece, and there's just so much to really get your teeth into with a work like that. And I'm noticing a bit of a theme now because the other concert I was going to mention was also Shostakovich. I was part of a really wonderful string quartet when I was at the Royal Academy, and we went to the West Cork Chamber Music Festival in Ireland. Our last concert there, we did Shostakovich Third String Quartet, which is probably one of my favourite string quartets. And it was one of those performances where it was a piece we played quite a bit beforehand in a few other places. But I don't know if you know the work. It's quite an elusive piece. It's quite hard to characterise, and there are lots of different ways that one can approach it. We'd had kind of hits and misses with it in our other performances, and for some reason in this particular performance, it just really came together. That kind of real magic moment where just suddenly it just clicks, and that was one I really remember a lot.
It's funny that you mentioned Shostakovich because I think Shostakovich does have that power to really pull you in as an artist when you are playing it, because the music is so highly emotive, and also physically, I think, because it's so physically demanding, a lot of it, especially some of that really fast, furious stuff, that you can't not be moved after giving it your all. Yeah, I'm not surprised that it's super poignant for you.
Yeah, because I mean, I recently read a bit of a bookworm as well. I recently read a great book called Music for Silenced Voices by Wendy Lesser, and it's a biography of Shostakovich, but it concentrates mainly on the string quartet. I think interestingly with the quartets, I think they're sometimes slightly underrated actually, because texturally they're not as complex as, say, the Bach quartet or the kind of 20th century quartet. But for me, like you say, there's a real emotional immediacy to them that is so, and also kind of quite theatrical quality to them as well, that really makes people kind of sit up and take notice. And going on to my favourite concert that I've watched was also Shostakovich Origin Quartet series, Wigmore Hall. It was one of those kind of bizarre concerts that I went to kind of just off the cuff at the last minute. We didn't have any plans. They performed the final Shostakovich String Quartet. They have a very special way of performing it, in that they perform it in almost complete darkness in Wigmore Hall, which is not something that's done very much. They had small lights on each stand, but the hall was almost in complete darkness. They requested that the applause would not take place until the last light had been turned off. So at the very end of the quartet, I mean, anyone who knows the piece, it basically fades away to nothing. And then each member of the quartet just slowly, one by one, turned off the light on their stand, and then the hall was in complete darkness for a few seconds before the lights came back on. And it was one of the most incredible performances. It was just so incredibly powerful. I mean, obviously the Bordens have close affinity with Shostakovich. I mean, Shostakovich, of course, worked with that quartet on many of the quartets when he was alive. So there's a great tradition there.
You felt a little bit like it was Shostakovich's voice actually there, present in the room.
Almost, yeah. I've heard them play the piece since, and it was wonderful, but there was just something about that evening that I don't think could ever be repeated. It was just such a special moment. So, yeah.
And that goes back to what you were talking about live music and just really emphasizing that every live performance one goes to is going to be different. You know, even if it's the same program, it's going to be different. There's so many different elements to it. Whereas you can watch the same video recording of a particular performance done on a cappella, and it's going to be the same.
Exactly.
Very controlled. But in a way, a concert venue is an uncontrolled environment.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
There's so many things that can affect the environmental factors, I think. It's really, really lovely to hear a trifecta of Shostakovich performances. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining me today on the podcast. So where can people find out more about your work and your agency?
Our website is keynoteartistmanagement.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I myself, I'm not the best kind of social media person as an individual, but I am trying. So I do have Instagram, but people can follow me on there.
Lovely. You know what? Instagram was one of those things that it took me a long time to get into. And for the first year or so that I had Instagram, I just thought, what on earth is this? But I actually prefer it now. I think it's my favorite social media platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any of these kind of social media tools, I'm going back now to parallels, but they can be an incredibly powerful tool for good and or evil. So you have to, it's a fine balance to tread.
You have to use it responsibly, for sure.
Yeah. I had a very interesting conversation actually with an artist recently. We were talking about social media and they're quite active on social media. We were discussing, what should you be posting? What shouldn't you be posting? What? And I made the connection. I said, well, for me, if you think about, when you're interpreting a work, for example, even if it's a work that is very heavily, detailed score and there's a huge amount of history and rhetoric and stuff for you to kind of follow, there's still a huge amount of decisions that you have to make as a performer. Ask yourself the question when you're practicing something, why exactly are you doing this bowing or fingering or phrasing? Or are you doing it because that's kind of what my teacher's bowings that I've got copied into my part says, or that's what everybody else does, or that's what I think other people should do, and that's not a very good reason to make that decision. And the same thing applies to social media, in my opinion. I mean, you shouldn't really be posting a picture of what you've eaten. That's what everybody does. That's not a good reason. You should be posting what you had for breakfast because, I don't know, you came across this really cool pancake recipe that you wanted to try and share with people. It's the same.
It's putting yourself in the audience's or the viewer's shoes and thinking,
yeah, absolutely.
Would I want to see this on my feed? Would I want to see this performed in this way? Is there a valid reason behind all this? Because I suppose in a way, social media is a little bit like a performance platform. And so you've got to make those decisions on how you're going to present yourself to the people who are going to be watching.
And if it's not true to what you really feel, then it's not going to connect with the people that are viewing it in the same way that any decision that you make instrumentally or vocally, whatever your discipline is, if it's not coming from a place that's true to you, then it's not really going to resonate with your audience. I think often musicians should, use their training a little more to kind of solve these other problems because they have all the answers.
Yeah. And that's why you're here to tell us these things. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your insights today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was Daniel Rainey. He is now my first call for tips related to Super Mario 64, as I've now purchased that game for the Switch. Turns out, it's quite difficult. Mario swimming levels are terrible. I die a lot. This week's Music College Didn't Prepare Me segment comes courtesy of cellist Molly McPherter, who's written a candidly honest piece about life as a recent graduate during a pandemic. One of the biggest things for me was the lack of preparation for being your own business and all that entails. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that who I am as a musician is completely entwined with who I am outside of playing the cello. For me, that's honest, very sensitive, and perhaps most relevantly to my point, pretty introverted. I absolutely hate being the centre of attention, which is pretty juxtaposed to being on stage for a living. My confidence comes completely from living and breathing the music that I'm making with others at that given moment. So I spent my student years completely focused on honing my craft and growing as a musician. When I graduated to start my freelance career, all I can say is that I felt completely overwhelmed and unprepared, and not for the reasons I thought I might. Suddenly, I had to have this self-assurance away from music making that I never felt I absolutely had to do. Finding my own concert venues, negotiating fees, what am I worth? Setting up professional profiles where, no matter how you swing them, seem just the slightest bit full of oneself. Still cringing at mine. Writing cover letters detailing why you think you are the best. Setting myself up as a sole trader. What even is that? Applying for jobs away from performing that you don't even want, but need to pay your rent. Juggling accepting high-profile work when it comes in, whilst managing the ethos of being reliable, whilst also rearranging the other work. And, dare I say the words, tax return? Then came COVID-19. Undoubtedly the hardest, most desolate time for not just shiny new freelancers, but all musicians. I don't need to explain further. It's turned out to be a curiously defining time for me. My playing work is now completely self-set up, homemade by me and my quartet. I still don't push forward the "I'm amazing and please book me" vibe. I'm still not sure what a sole trader actually is, even though I am one. And when I stop and think about the music I've made in the last 3 months, I can't believe I had the skills and self-assurance to set it all up on my own during a global pandemic. But honestly, I can say that I've shared some of the most engaging music of my life, and I'm loving every second I get to do it right now. But one thing is for sure, music college certainly did not prepare me for it. I have to thank Molly for that very touching, relatable and open account. Indeed, nothing throws you into the deep end quite like a global pandemic. Many musicians have been exercising seemingly newfound entrepreneurial skills during this time to ensure they can continue making music, which I'm so happy to hear about. Molly's the cellist of the aforementioned homemade Corran Quartet, who have been busy over the summer performing lots of concerts outdoors and have some more concerts and streams coming up. They're in the middle of a Beethoven quartet cycle. No big deal. Details in the show notes. If you have something that music college didn't prepare you for that you'd like shared or discussed on the podcast, then let me know. You can email me at asitcomespodcast@gmail.com. That's it for today. Special thanks to Ros Nagy for my logo and Daniel Elms for my jingle. Huge thanks to Daniel Rainey for sharing his insights as my guest today, and thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, email me at asitcomespodcast@gmail.com. Like and follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at asitcomespod. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. I must mention, there is a YouTube channel now. Go look at that. And thank you for spreading the word. Chat to you soon and take good care. Bye.